The Dancing with Depression podcast is brought to you by CAS-CM, where CM stands for Content Matters, because content brings people together. I was 7 years old when I realized I might not make it back to the surface of the water. And the truth is, I might not be here today had someone not have an eye on me. Welcome to the Dancing with Depression podcast. I'm your host, Adam Turner. This story starts on a hot summer day at Alexander Lake in Bayville, Connecticut, sometime around 1983, when my parents signed me up for swimming lessons. The lake was a fun place to go to on a hot New England day. At the time, they had a concession stand filled with all the goodies: hot dogs, burgers, fries, just to name a few. After we filled our bellies, we had to wait 30 minutes to go in the water. Why? Because that's what the adults said we had to do. There were a few options to distract us for what felt like eternity, but some of us chose to hang out at the picnic tables or play on the swing sets. As for me, my choice was the arcade. Oh, I can't forget the mini golf course across the street from the lake, which I unexpectedly found myself hanging out there a lot. More details to come later. But if you were to ask someone who grew up in the area what they thought of the lake, I'm confident the words used to describe it would be fun, great memories, relaxing. For me, well, there's a moment from my childhood that would change my perception of the lake for decades. To be fair, Alexander Lake was more of a casualty of the memory. See, my parents signed me up for swimming lessons, which my brother Joel had started a year earlier. But when it came to the lake and swimming, he could be best described as a fish. He loved the water. He would swim out to the floating docks. The slide was also a very popular attraction and much further out. But I used to visualize the day that I would be a good enough swimmer to go out there and slide down into the water, making a big splash. My first day of class started with some basic activities meant to get us acclimated to the water, putting our feet in and feeling whether the bottom was sandy or muddy or rocky, then sitting in the water and splashing around a little bit, getting our faces wet. As the classes moved on, we would advance. At that point, I don't think I had a like or a dislike when it came to the water. I do remember not being a huge fan of having water splashed in my face by someone else, but it didn't cause me to pay much attention to it. I'm not sure how many lessons I had attended at this point, but I remember one of my favorite lessons being when we grabbed the kickboard. For me, it was the closest feeling I ever got to swimming. After making my way to the first floating dock with my kickboard, I hopped onto the dock to rest. I liked to look around, fascinated with how big the lake felt at that time, looking at the nice houses belonging to people that enjoyed living the lake life, and simply get lost in the sounds of summer. The majority of those sounds came from the kids at the dock, farther from shore, jumping into the water, with a few daredevils that would do a flip before crashing into the lake. There was also a lot of activity from the kids sliding down the slide, screaming with joy, and then splash. Except this splash wasn't from a kid hitting the water at the end of the slide. It was me. I had been pushed off the dock into the water. In that moment, I don't think I would have had words to describe how I felt. But I do now. Panic. Not the kind of panic where you yell or cry. I'm talking about the kind where you can't find the surface and you can't get a breath. At 7 years old, I was scared beyond belief. And the truth is, I might not be here today if someone hadn't been watching me like a hawk. I remember the panic. I remember the fear. And then suddenly, I was out of the water. I don't remember what he said to me. I just remember breathing again. The space between those two moments, I didn't know it at the time, but someone had been watching me the entire time. That someone was my brother, Joel. Joel knew I couldn't swim, and although I didn't realize it at the time, he made it a point to keeping an eye on me. We aren't 100% sure why he was at that dock that day. I think he might have been swimming in from the dock that was further out. He saw me on his way back and just decided to stop by and say hi before going back to shore. That part will remain a mystery. But what won't remain a mystery is that he pulled me out of the water that day. And I've thought about that a lot over the years. What if he hadn't been there? What if he hadn't been watching? It would be hard to convince me that I wouldn't have drowned that day if not for him. Turns out Joel took his role as big brother very seriously. And I didn't make it easy for him. Runt would probably be the closest word to describe my physical presence growing up, which made me an easy target for kids to pick on. And I had a mouth on me too. Sorry, Joel. Love ya. I remember when a couple of kids were bothering me on the play escape between the memorial school and the high school. Joel came to save me again. The details or outcomes aren't that important. And yes, that's the nice way of saying we didn't exactly win any fights, but we got out alive. So there's that. But back to that moment at Alexander Lake. It could have ended very differently. And the reason it didn't was my brother. Physically, Joel saved me that day. But there was one thing he couldn't save me from. The decision I made in that moment. Because somewhere between the panic and catching my breath again, 7-year-old Adam came up with a solution. Never get back in the water. Yep, 7 years old and already solving life's problems with avoidance. And when you think about it, it's actually a pretty logical solution for a 7-year-old. If the water almost killed you, avoid the water. But here's the interesting part. Avoidance isn't something only 7-year-olds do. We do it as adults too. We avoid situations, we avoid conversations, and we avoid risks. Sometimes we even avoid things that might help us. And if you've ever struggled with your mental health, you probably know what I mean. Because sometimes the mind convinces us that staying away from something is the safest option, even when the thing we're avoiding might actually be part of the healing. A rule my brain followed for decades. Because that moment didn't stay at Alexander Lake, it followed me. Heck, just a couple of weeks ago, it showed up when I was invited to walk on the frozen lake. Not Alexander Lake, but a lake where a friend lives now. The ice measured 18 inches thick. From what I'm told, that's safe enough to drive a car on. But I wasn't stepping onto that ice without my life jacket. Not because anybody told me to, because my brain said, wear the life jacket. And that decision turned into a domino effect because I decided at 7 years old to avoid. I ended up missing a unique moment with my wife, Bobby, when she not only walked onto the frozen pond, But she made her first snow angel while I stayed back, hiding behind my fear and using work as an excuse. It's not easy to admit, but gotta keep it real with you guys. Another time, I received an invitation to my close friend's wedding and noticed it was on Block Island, which meant I had to take the ferry. And I was terrified. Not nervous, terrified. I did attend. Turns out our friendship was stronger than my fear of drowning. Actually, I think it's more like I feared her being upset with me more than the 24 minutes it was going to take on the speed ferry. And it showed up again as Bobby and I were house hunting, and we found a beautiful house. Everything about it felt right. The location, the price, the space, the driveway. Then I saw the pool, and my brain could only process one word: no. Bobby started pointing out all the safety features, the fence, the alarms. Everything is designed to make it safe so we can all enjoy the space. My brain wasn't seeing safety features. My brain was seeing all the things that could go wrong. Someone gets a cramp while swimming. Someone slips and falls in. Someone goes under. And I'm the only one there. Then somebody asked a question that I think they felt was going to change the decision I made over 40 years ago. Even though they weren't aware of the Alexander Lake incident, they asked, well, if it was Bobby, you'd jump in and save her, right? And I remember standing there, trying to explain something I didn't have words for. It reminded me of the first time I tried explaining depression to my best friend. You feel it, you live it, but trying to explain it to someone who hasn't experienced it, sometimes there just aren't words. Because the truth is this: it wouldn't be that I wouldn't want to save Bobby. It's that in every scenario I have ever imagined over the past 40 years, not one of them ended with me saving anyone. They were a vision of me watching a loved one drown. And that consistent visual only reinforced the avoidance. All from one moment, 7 years old, at Alexander Lake. Some of you right now can't comprehend what I just said, and I get it. So here's the I'm not a doctor warning, just my perspective on why moments like that stick with us. When you're a kid, your brain is still figuring out how the world works. So when something scary happens, your brain tries to solve the problem as quickly as possible. It creates a rule. Water is dangerous. Stay away from water. And the interesting part is, your brain doesn't always go back later and update that rule. Even when you grow up, even when you understand things differently, that rule just sits there quietly in the background, influencing decisions you don't even realize are connected to it. Experiences like that don't always stay in the past. Sometimes they sit quietly in the background of your life until something reminds you they're still there. For me, one of those reminders came while I was watching the news. There was a story about Malcolm Jamal Warner. Yeah, the actor who played Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show. And for a second, I didn't think about the actor. I thought about Theo. Weird? Maybe to some, but every single week, Theo was in my living room. So I didn't separate the two. I felt like I knew him. And the story mentioned a drowning incident during a family vacation. And just like that, my brain went right back to Alexander Lake. It didn't matter that I was an adult now. It didn't matter that I understand things differently. My brain didn't process context. It didn't process odds. It just said, see, this is why we stay away from the water. That's how fast it happens. One moment, one headline, and suddenly a belief formed at 7 years old feels just as real as it did back then. And that's the part that's easy to miss. Because moments like that don't just remind us of the past. They reinforce it. They quietly validate the rules we created when we were younger, without us ever questioning if those rules still make sense today. And if we never take the time to talk through those experiences, to really look at where those rules came from, we can end up living our lives reacting to triggers we don't even realize are there. Not because we're broken, but because we never revisited the moment that created the rule in the first place. Unprocessed experiences don't disappear. They just show up as reactions. So let me ask you something. What's something in your life that feels like a strong reaction, but might actually be tied to an old experience? A moment you haven't gone back to in a while, but it's still quietly influencing how you think, how you feel, or what you avoid. Because sometimes we're not reacting to what's in front of us. We're reacting to something that happened in the past. I mentioned the decision I made to never get back in the water. So, the next day when my parents dropped Joel and me off, I waited until their car was out of sight and then walked across the street to the miniature golf place for 90 minutes until it was time to get picked up. Joel knew where I was, and in the 80s, that was just as good as seeing me with his own eyes. There are moments in life that feel small when they happen. Conversation, a mistake, a moment of fear. But sometimes those moments plant something inside of us. A belief, a boundary, a rule about what's safe and what isn't. 7 years old at Alexander Lake, I made a decision about water that I carried for decades and continue to carry today. Not because someone told me to, but because my brain decided that was the safest way to survive. A few seconds that shaped decades of decisions. Some conscious, some subconscious, and some I'm probably still discovering. Maybe the real work as we get older isn't pretending those moments didn't happen. Maybe it's understanding how they shaped us and deciding whether we still need those rules today. Because sometimes the rules that helped us survive as kids are the same rules that quietly limit us as adults. So I'll leave you with this question. What happened to you when you were 7? And how much of your life today might still be shaped by it? Ever heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child? Well, same applies here. It takes an awesome audience like you to help get this message in front of someone who needs to hear they're not alone. That's why I ask for your continued support. Whether you like, share, follow, or leave a review, and if so inclined, can donate, it all helps more than you know. If something resonated, pass it along. You never know who needs it. Want to connect? Email me anytime. dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. And remember, when it comes to depression, take the lead. Content and safety notice. Dancing with Depression may include discussions of suicide, self-harm, trauma, and emotional distress. Listeners' discretion advised. This podcast shares personal experiences and is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If you need immediate support, call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. For non-crisis help and resources, contact NAMI at 1-800-950-6264.